Hi, welcome. So we're just going to go through some markets and trends surrounding the algae and algae-based products, followed by the research done by Swansea University. So to start with, we're just going to look at the market overview. So algae products and seaweed products are hugely growing due to their functionality and increasing demands on healthy food. This has seen a huge growth. It's looking about 2 billion extra by 2026. Also, we're seeing the demand for commercial sea vegetables, and this is in a range of different applications, all through from whole foods as to ingredients. We're also seeing that this is driven by the global wellness trend, and this is also seeing a multiple applications from drinks and to snack foods. So the leading trends are quite broad. So these range from higher protein content, from different working within energy, and also we're looking at the different provenance of where those foods are originally from. But they all congregate to looking into those healthier and those functional ingredients. So these are looking for ways that it can help enhance the body and mind, bringing people together, and how it can also redefine quality. There's already quite a range of different algae-based and seaweed-based products on the market already, and you've probably seen them within sushi and various formats as that so far. We're also seeing a huge amount being driven from all the components that are there within those algae-based products. There's a huge array of bioactive compounds and also nutritional enhancements. So there we've got about 70% protein content in seaweed, and this can then be used in powder formats. It can be used to create burgers and to create all different familiar foods that we're used to, but also it can be used as replacements. So whilst we're looking to bring down the salt content in many foods, we can then use different algae foods which bring in that salty taste, but actually they're high in potassium rather than sodium. So again, really bringing that health halo. They're also very high in PFAS, so your polyunsaturated fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids. So again, these are those foods or those compounds that we're really low in and we're actually deficient in within the UK population. So really, really easy way of adding in essential nutrients. Also a great source of fibre. And again, fibre and gut microbiome products are really driving the market at the minute. And again, anything that can help work on the microbiome generally is looking then to help work with body weight management and also general overall health. So again, different things that we've seen on the market already. So there's a range of different foods that are out there already, and also supplements. So originally we were seeing it with spirulina and chlorella, and that was in supplement-based formats, so again, kind of capsules or tablets. But again, this now is growing to be so much more than that. So we're looking at it as oils, it's into chocolate, it's into different powders, it's into kind of functional snacks, alternatives to things like crisps. So a huge range of different foods that can be used. And also it's really going into those other trends, like functionality, metabolic health, gut health, and snackification. So again, those things that are really kind of helping people just eat really good food on the go. So again, where these kind of foods are really kind of being implemented, and we, as we said before, started off with supplements. So with supplemental health, so again, these were adding into different smoothies. Generally, historically, it was seen as something that was very dark green, something very unpalatable, you'd quickly drink it very quickly, and you wouldn't particularly enjoy it. But it's really changing. So now we're seeing different algae having different colorations, and this is bringing a huge amount of appeal. And also they're not as strong flavours as they were, or they're being paired up with other strong flavours, for example, like ginger. So again, just to make sure that that flavour combination is much more suited and much more palatable. Then we're also seeing different snacks. As I said before, there's different alternatives to crisps. We're also seeing that in kind of protein balls and different foods that we can eat on the go. So again, healthy food and permissible indulgence is a huge, huge trend, and something where algae and seaweed-based foods is really tapped in on. And again, the benefits there are really bringing in a range of different minerals and vitamins, and also the protein and the fibre content. We've also seen plant-based fish alternatives. So as before, we were saying it gives that little bit of a salty taste, but without the high salt content. We're also seeing that then be used in fish alternatives. So again, you've got that kind of that origin to really kind of tasting nice and strongly, but without it being from a fish-based product. So again, really bringing into that plant-based and that vegan lifestyle. Also, just other foods that are being used. So again, there's quite an array of different areas that these are really being picked up on. So we've got things like burgers and sea dogs. So with those, it's just an alternative really for something that's familiar. So a really nice, easy, swappable food. So we're seeing this as the meat alternative trend. And again, they're not seen as kind of being so off-putting as they were in the past. People are quite intrigued actually by the coloration and by the difference of them. We're also seeing different cubes or different additives and condiments you can just put in as an addition to really add a huge nutritional profile to that food or beverage. So with these bakes, again as their additional ingredient, we're seeing it being added to a huge range of different bakes, cakes, and goods that you can have that you either purchase or that you do at home. So again, it really kind of brings that great kind of individualization and also personalization that you can put into your food, really enhancing again the mineral content to an individual specification. You can also then use it as a different salad dressing. So we can see with the baby sugar pelt, you kind of sprinkle it on the top, adds again a little bit of a saltiness, but without adding kind of that salt to it, and just a different dimension. So really a bit of intrigue. So with the flavour trends that are coming into 2022 and beyond, we're seeing from the sea being a big trend. So this is anything from the shellfish and the fish itself, but also into the sea vegetables. We're seeing nori, seaweed, dulse being big leaders for the next year. And here we have those condiments I've mentioned before, which are really, really good for adding in nutritional components and adding in a little bit more flavour. So with smoothies, you might have seen places like Starbucks, for example, really kind of putting on this, capitalising on this trend with different flavours and different colours. So again, you see kind of mermaid or unicorn blends of different colours. And we're seeing it on the shelves. So Innocent's been very successful with launching their Baltimore blue. And also they've got a green one using spirulina. So they're really bring these different colours in and all of those nutritional profiles with it as well. So really, really exciting space that's being moved forward. And then I'm going to send it over now onto the Swansea University to give a little bit more information.
So, hi everyone, I'm Rochelle. I'm a PhD student from Swansea University, and I've been working on this project around consumer research on the acceptance of algae or seaweed, more particularly in seaweed-based food products. Before we get started on actually the findings of the project, I just thought I'd quickly introduce us, who we have on the call from Swansea University. So we have Tennessee Randall and Chloe Meller on the call as well. Tennessee is a PhD student and Chloe is a MSc student in the department with us. We also have Dr. Laura Wilkinson, who is a senior lecturer in the department and also the PI for the project, and she'll be joining in at the end of the call as well to answer any questions that you have. So all of us that I've just mentioned are academics and postgraduate researchers in our research group at Swansea University called SNAC, which is the Swansea Nutrition, Appetite and Cognition Research Group. We're all academics interested in eating behaviour and consumer research. And between us now today, we have a very wide range of expertise and cover lots of research topics relating to eating behaviour and consumer research. We conduct both online and face-to-face research, so everything from things like survey-based research and focus groups to things like experimental studies in the laboratory, where we run things like decision-making paradigms and food intake studies with consumers that we bring in. Next slide, please. So moving on to talk about this project specifically, the aim of the project was to essentially explore the consumer acceptability of seaweed-based food products for UK consumers specifically, and help identify scope for further product development within this area where we start to consider seaweeds as an alternative source of protein to animal-based protein sources, so things like meat and dairy. What we then aim to do, sorry, can we go back, was identify the product-related drivers of consumer acceptance for these foods, and also identify key consumer profiles that we could potentially target with future products, and also identify the current consumer awareness of seaweed-based food products and explore these beliefs in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So the project had two main research components. The first of which was an online survey that we distributed to consumers throughout the UK. And this was made up of kind of two essential parts. So the first part was that we showed participants the phrase algae-based or seaweed-based food products, just a bit more generally, and framed as a food product. And they were asked to rate algae-based foods in terms of things like taste, edibility, healthiness, and sustainability, as well as familiarity. And then they were also asked to rate their acceptability. So acceptability in this case was measured in terms of readiness to adopt as an alternative to meat products, their willingness to try the product, their willingness to buy the product, and their expected liking for the product. But in addition to just showing this kind of general description of seaweed-based foods, we also showed them 6 kind of hypothetical food products where seaweed was less of a focus and potentially more of a complementary component. So we showed them things like sushi rolls, a juice drink, a burger, an energy bar, and a pasta dish, and baby sugar kelp, which was kind of like a condiment or garnish. And we also measured their ratings in exactly the same way. So we measured their response in terms of taste and edibility, etc., and their acceptability to identify those product-related drivers of consumer acceptability. And we also collected some key consumer demographics as well to get at those consumer profiles. Next slide, please. Thank you. The second research component was to conduct online focus groups with a select sample of UK consumers to get those more in-depth beliefs. So we conducted 6 focus groups with an average of 5 to 6 participants per group. And we gave them guided talking points related to these kind of product attributes that we could be expected from seaweed-based food products. So we had them talk about things like edibility and sustainability and healthiness, as well as things like affordability. And more particularly as well, we asked them to kind of discuss what they would like to see in terms of packaging and product labels, and how they would like to see these kinds of products positioned in the market overall as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So across these 2 research components, we had just over 500 UK consumers take part. And the key demographics to kind of note on this slide is that most participants were actually meat and or fish consumers. So just over 90% of all participants who took the online survey were meat and or fish consumers. And this was a diet that they had been following as a lifelong choice. So they tended to be kind of consumers that were more set in terms of their dietary behaviours and choices to date, rather than consumers that had potentially switched to things like a newer vegetarian or vegan diet. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to pass over to Tennessee now to talk you through some of the online survey findings.
Thank you, Rochelle. Hi, I'm Tennessee, and I'm going to take you through the online research findings. So firstly, we identified whether consumers' beliefs around seaweed products could predict their acceptance of the hypothetical foods. For example, could we estimate participants' willingness to try seaweed based on their perceptions of healthiness? To get a better understanding, we looked at whether there were any links between the 8 beliefs measured and the 4 ratings of acceptability. The links are interpreted through the above scale, which runs from 0 to 1. 0 would indicate no relationship present, but the nearer the line gets to 1, the stronger the relationship. From this image, you can see that 5 beliefs showed a significant positive relationship. These were naturalness, ethics and sustainability, familiarity, healthiness, and taste and edibility. This means that the more positive consumers' beliefs were about seaweed products, the higher their acceptability ratings were as well. We can also interpret how strong these relationships are. For example, a weak relationship would have a value of around 0.2. A moderate relationship would be any value between 0.3 and 0.5, and a strong relationship would be anything above 0.6. Out of the 5 significant beliefs, it was taste and edibility that was the most related to acceptability measures, and this produced a strong relationship. Next slide, please. So despite finding relationships, when these beliefs were used to predict acceptability, we found that taste and edibility was the only product feature which could successfully predict consumers' willingness to try, buy, their expected liking of the product, and readiness to adopt seaweed as a meat alternative. Familiarity also predicted consumers' willingness to buy and their expected liking. In comparison, all other beliefs, such as healthiness, expensiveness, and naturalness, could not be used to predict acceptability. Next slide, please. So another part of our research examined beliefs about seaweed when consumers saw a general definition of algae or a hypothetical food product where algae was an ingredient. For example, a kelp and nut energy bar or a seaweed burger. So the graph shows consumers' average taste and edibility scores across the 6 hypothetical foods compared with the seaweed on the bottom bar. Foods with the stars were rated to be the tastiest food, with sushi being rated the highest. In comparison, the products that were more novel were rated as the least tasty. This was apparent for the seaweed, baby sugar kelp, and juice drink. Next slide, please. Furthermore, when comparing familiarity across foods, the baby sugar kelp was less familiar than the algae. However, the energy bar and sushi were rated as more familiar to consumers than the algae. As you can see, sushi was rated the most familiar food. This is likely to be due to the current availability of sushi in the supermarkets and at restaurants. These findings indicate that more familiar food products are perceived as more palatable than foods uncommon to the individual's diet, which is demonstrated by the high ratings given to sushi compared to the low ratings given to the baby sugar kelp. And the next slide, please. So next, we tested whether consumers' demographics could predict acceptance of the hypothetical foods. For example, could we estimate participants' expected liking of seaweed based on their age or interest in consuming healthy foods? As before, we looked at whether there were any links between the 10 demographics measured and the 4 ratings of acceptability. So the links are interpreted through the above scale, which runs from -1 to +1. And from this image, you can see that 6 demographics showed a significant relationship, where we had 3 positive and 3 negative relationships. Negative relationships indicate as one score increases, the other decreases. This was apparent for the perceived benefits of meat, food neophobia, and food technology neophobia. For example, as consumers placed more importance on the nutritional benefits of meat, the less accepting they were of seaweed products. Additionally, consumers who were more reluctant to try new foods were less likely to accept seaweed as a meat alternative. For the positive relationships, we found that consumers who were more interested in the health benefits of food and were more concerned over the impact of food on the environment were more accepting of the algae. Taken together, the reluctance to try new foods and perceived importance of meat were the demographics most related to acceptability ratings, and the strength of this relationship was moderate. And the next slide, please. So when using the demographics to predict acceptability, we found that consumers' reluctance to try new foods was the only demographic which could predict all ratings of acceptability, which is willingness to buy, try, their expected liking, and readiness to adopt seaweed as a meat alternative. In comparison, consumers' age, perceived benefits of meat, their concerns over the environment, and interests in eating healthy foods could predict at least one of the acceptability ratings. Finally, all other demographics measured were poor predictors of acceptability. And the next slide. So when we used both consumer demographics and beliefs about seaweed products to predict readiness to adopt, we found that this was higher in people who were older, had stronger beliefs about the environmental impacts of food, and had weaker beliefs about the benefits of meat. Furthermore, these effects increased when products were perceived as more appetizing. And the next one, please. Additionally, we found that food neophobia was minimized when seaweed was believed to be tasty and edible. Relating to our earlier findings, consumers' reluctance to try new foods was a key predictor of acceptability. Therefore, producers can potentially overcome this barrier by ensuring developed products are perceived as being more palatable. And the next slide. So to summarize, this map represents the key predictors of consumers' acceptability ratings. The green flags represent a positive relationship to acceptability, whereas the red flags represent a negative relationship. Furthermore, a deeper curve in the graph represents a stronger relationship, which is also indicated by the size of the flag. As you can see, the four most important factors for predicting consumers' acceptability are whether the product is tasty, how much the consumer values meat, how fearful consumers are of trying new foods, and how familiar they are with the product. So I'm now going to pass you over to Chloe, who is going to discuss the findings from the focus group. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tennessee. Good morning, everyone. So as Tennessee said, I'm just going to be running you through the qualitative elements of the study. And these are the key themes and topics identified within the focus groups. We have the next slide, please. So this slide is just showing the consumer acceptability of algae and the key themes that are identified. Now, the dotted arrows are the sub-themes that we'll explore in a little more detail as well. And the blue stars next to some of the words are just showing that these are also linked to the packaging and marketing component as well. We're not going to be looking at affordability for the purpose of focusing on consumer acceptability, but if there are any questions on this, I'm more than happy to answer those later for you. And each slide is just going to show a couple of quotes that were used within each theme. So if we have the next slide, please. Thank you. So pre-existing thoughts with regards to algae was the first theme identified. And as you can see, most participants thought of algae as an aquatic plant rather than a food product. And this is shown through the use of words like green, salty and slimy, and nothing related to a food product. The next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just a brief slide showing that despite participants thinking of algae as an aquatic plant, when they were of the knowledge that it could be a food product, they were quite willing to try it due to curiosity and the nuance of it, and because of all the benefits that it consists of. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first barrier that was identified within participants through the concerns that they had was the edibility of the algae. And most participants were a little concerned whether it had a sensory appeal, so whether it would look nice, taste nice, smell nice. And this is quite a concern for participants that may need to be addressed in future to assure participants that it is something that is going to be edible and appetizing. As you can see by the blue asterisk, this is also related to packaging and marketing, but we'll explore that when that slide comes up. Next slide, please. Thank you. So healthiness was another theme identified within focus groups, and the majority of participants were aware of the health benefits that algae has. So this was things like high in protein, omega-3s and iron. And a lot of people were really happy with that due to it adding that extra nutrition to their diet, whether it's vegan, vegetarian, or just trying to enhance a meat diet. However, when thinking about the other ingredients that will be added to create a full food product, and when the processing starts to develop the product, whether the healthiness would decrease. So that was a concern that participants did appear to have amongst these focus groups. And again, this relates to packaging and marketing, which we will be exploring in a bit more detail later. Next slide, please. Thank you. Similarly to healthiness, sustainability appeared to have the same kind of trends throughout the focus groups. So people did expect the algae to be sustainable due to it being growing in abundance and not having to go through a great deal of processing if you're going to consume it in its natural form. However, when developed into a further food product, people were concerned whether sustainability would decrease. If it was mass produced, would it decrease? And would the other ingredients also be sustainable? Again, this relates to packaging and marketing, which we'll explore in the following slides. Thank you. So packaging and marketing came up, and there was a lot of discussion through all focus groups on this. So a couple of ideas that people had that would entice them to try the product and buy the product was it being in a prominent location in the store, as people weren't aware that it was a food product coming into the study. That's something that they might desire. Another thing that came up was there was a lot of different foods that people suggested that they would like to see that will consume algae. So this was sweet treats, chocolate, drinks, smoothies, condiments and seasonings. However, it did appear to be quite apparent through all focus groups that people are desiring a product that they're already familiar with. So as Tennessee and Rochelle have said before, the burger and things like that seemed a bit more edible because people already were consuming these products. Another factor that came up was the unique selling point that the product has. So whether it would be better to consume an algae-based product over a kale-based product, for example, and why people should choose this product over a product that they already know. And finally, the other thing that was mentioned amongst focus groups was recipe ideas and suggestions on how to use the algae, as people weren't really aware on how to incorporate it into their current diet. So with the links to the other themes that we've already discussed, healthiness and sustainability are expected to be in algae itself. However, people are concerned whether the developed food product would also be healthy and sustainable. So that may be something to consider when thinking about the packaging and marketing element. And finally, the edibility of the product might need to be addressed on the product packaging and marketing. So suggestions to whether it does look nice, taste nice, and some descriptions on that. So I think that's it from the qualitative element of the study. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them later. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chloe. Can we go back a slide? Thank you. So just to bring those two research components back together then, so we've had results from the online survey and results from the focus groups. It appears that UK consumers want seaweed-based food products that appear to be familiar, that are easily accessible, that are healthy and sustainable. But consumers want a bit more reassurance around products being appetizing and tasty, and they also want to know how they can actually incorporate these kinds of food products into their diet as a whole. So what these results highlight then is further avenues to explore consumer testing within this area relating to seaweed and seaweed-based food products, and particularly in terms of relating these kinds of findings to more specific product contexts. So for example, some product attributes might be more important to highlight on some product packaging. So for example, for sushi that appeared to be more familiar, then putting that emphasis on being appetizing and tasty might be less important than for those more novel food products that were coming out as less familiar to UK consumers. There's also the potential to explore further strategies to increase consumption of algae across UK consumers by looking into potential key demographics relating to those specific product ideas. So for example, some products, as some of you are probably aware, products may be more appropriate for some consumer profiles. So for example, those consumers scoring higher in food neophobia might be less accepting of those more novel food ideas that may be more particular to algae and seaweed, and more accepting of the products that, again, like Chloe mentioned, have come up across other protein alternatives that are widely available on the market today. Next slide, please. So we would love to hear from you, and please leave your comments in the chat. If you have any ideas around what you would like to see in further consumer research on algae and seaweeds, or if you have any ideas about what you would like to see tested in terms of marketing and product packaging features, and if you have any other questions about further consumer research within this area, then please feel free to leave your comments in the chat. So that's it from us. thank you very much for listening, and we would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, everybody. I think that was really insightful. And if anybody has got some questions, then the team would be more than happy to answer any of those. I'm just looking in the chat to see if anything has come up at all. I'm just seeing that you had a challenge with listening to Natalie on some of her slides, unfortunately. We can obviously, we'll obviously share the recording at the end, and please do feel free to contact us if there's anything that you couldn't get clarity on, and Natalie would be more than happy to share that information. So no questions from everybody? Any thoughts on the consumer research? Okay, thank you, Flo. So consumer research on amounts of seaweed in food that is acceptable. So in terms of flavour profile, or would that be in terms of whether they want a complete seaweed product or just as a minor ingredient? Is that what you were suggesting, Flo? Yeah, people don't like foods with too much seaweed added. So I guess that is a flavour profile thing. So it goes back to taste being one of the key drivers in terms of acceptability. We've got another question here. How typical was your survey group compared to the UK population as a whole? So was it a good demographic split compared to the general population?
So we did have a wide range of participants taking part across both surveys. So we did manage to recruit participants from across the UK. So it wasn't just kind of Swansea based. We did have participants from all corners of the UK, which was good to see. We did have a wide age range as well across consumers, and we did have quite a nice split between males and females. So yeah, I think we had about 60% females. But of course, with any kind of sample in this setting, we do have to be aware that certain participants are probably more likely to participate in this kind of research than others. So yeah,
I think generally we've got a good cross section of consumers who responded to the questionnaire and answered. Obviously, we can deep dive into specific demographics in future consumer research, where areas are more of interest to understand that in more detail.
And can I also add that one of the benefits of the approach that we took was that we used a cover story when we were recruiting the participants. So what that means is that they didn't know that they were coming in to do focus groups about algae-based products, or they just thought that they were coming in to look at a new product that was being developed. And the benefit of that is that a lot of the studies that are already out there, they have a really biased sample. So of people who, you're essentially preaching to the converted. So you're kind of finding out acceptability ratings from people who are already much more likely to be buying those sorts of products anyway. And that's fine to a certain extent. But if you want to really expand the acceptability in the marketplace and appeal to new consumers and new buyers for your products, then you really need to make sure that the people who come in and do the testing and do the research are that new audience. And I think that we achieved that within our sample because they weren't a very select subgroup. We had a real cross-section, and in particular in terms of their existing diet. And I think that that bit is really important because that really addresses the kind of bias that can happen in consumer research. So I think that that's important and something that we did in this work.
Thanks, Laura. And Susie's commented she works for a company for alganuity, and they have a chlorella product, which, yes, Susie, I've listened to your presentations on the product. I think it's amazing. So it's actually it's a white chlorella. So for example, if you added it to a Victoria sandwich, your cake wouldn't be green. It would look like a normal Victoria sandwich, which is quite an interesting debate. When I listened to the talk with them, the hardcore worthy consumers who bought into vegan diets were quite happy to eat green cake, but a lot of more traditional diet consumers would obviously like something that actually looked like a Victoria sponge. And I think that's probably something that's come out of this research, is that familiarity would include colour, I guess, in terms of that.
Absolutely. And Rochelle, do you want to tell everybody about your ideal portion size measure? Because that could be a really interesting tool to use in this context.
Yeah, so we've kind of just developed an online tool to measure consumers' preferred portion size for different foods, where we actually photograph foods in various kind of portion sizes. So from a 20-calorie portion up to, say, 1,000 calories. And participants are able to select their preference in terms of portion size. And it's really quite adaptable and versatile moving forward with this kind of consumer research. So you could play around with the products that you show in terms of, for example, concentrations of seaweed or algae across conditions, and see how that actually affects the amount of food that consumers are willing to select and consume for these kinds of products.
Thank you, Rochelle. We got any more questions at all from anybody? Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. I hope you found it insightful. As I say, we have recorded, so we'll be able to share that with you. We're also going to share the short survey with the questions that Rochelle just asked at the end of the presentation, just to understand where the team could look to potentially focus some of their future research in this area that would be beneficial for other organisations and companies to be able to grow this sector in the future. So thank you very much for attending. Thanks, guys, for all your hard work. The research is amazing, and yeah, hopefully we can build on that going forward and provide some more insight for the sector to grow as a sustainable new food source. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and we'll be in touch with the recording as soon as we can. Thanks very much.